Let's see. Cool. So I think you guys were mostly on when I mentioned this before, but there is a chat tool somewhere on the little drop down tools, and you can let's see, share it. There's a little chat button. You can actually click on that, and then it should bring up a window where you can throw questions or something, or you can interrupt me. It's totally free form. This is the first time. We'll see how it goes, and then feedback later would be good. So keep that in mind. So I'm assuming everyone, you guys are seeing my screen, right? Oh, nice. Hi, guys. Great. Cool. Um, okay, so I'm going to get rolling. So basically, the idea here is I've been trying to stretch my wings. I mentioned it in the invite. I've got a medium class club class glider, which is like a 40 to 1 glider. It's consider it 1.5 generation glass, mid 70s, 40 to 1 with flaps. It glides better with ballast, but I don't have ballast. Um, and so this is what I was going to try to touch on. It's like here's a flight on the right. It was just under 300K, right around 300 kilometers. And I planned in advance. I looked for the weather and all this. So how do you go about this? And as I learned how to do this, there's a ton of things. And I tried to find like, I don't want to throw tens of thousands of dollars at like equipment and stuff. And what are the essentials? How do you approach this? And then I even talk about flying it because I learned a lot about flying it and how do I set limits to avoid disaster, um, and what kind of routes do I pick? How do I pick them? And then there's some stuff just to not get behind on the day, like what should you do in advance? And then I've had a few surprises. Um, so I'll proceed on if no one has any questions there yet. Okay, so number one, weather drives everything. And there's the predicted weather and there's the actual weather. The predicted weather is the best tool for me. There we could debate. There's many out there. Dean uses some other stuff. I've settled on SkySight. Um, I think it's as good as anything else, potentially better than a lot. And SkySight is a web interface. I don't know, $80 a year, something like that. And so I just like let's say it's Tuesday and or maybe even the weekend and we're thinking about like a midweek soaring day maybe and then obviously our weekend ops. So I start scrolling through the days in SkySight. It gives you up to 5 days in advance look. So it's got so many tools. I'll touch on a few of the key ones. But the first one I want to mention is called potential flight distance. It's kind of a one size fits all look at the day. It's like one plot for the entire day, and it gives you some color codes for depending on where you are, how far you could go on a given day if you're a pretty good pilot. And I'll get into that in a second. So like I actually looked at it for like New Year's Eve or something, or actually not New Year's, but 31 January. And you see you get these dark blues, a little bit of greens. And if you look at the kilometers, it basically tells you if you launch from within by the way, does my mouse position come across in the presentation at
Yeah,
all?
it does. Yep.
Good. Okay. So if you launch from like the Wyndham area, it's saying, if you're a pretty skilled pilot, you're still not going to even make 200 kilometers on that day. And it's still fairly optimistic. And I'll get into that in a second too. Now this is also South Africa the same day. You can see the color situation is way different, and you get some, everything from 400 to 800 or 900 kilometers. And I've seen days in our area at the 700K, 5 to 700 colors. And those are the days I just look for. So I scroll through the days, Monday, Tuesday, and I just look for some colors and I go, okay. And if
Hey,
anything,
Bill,
yeah.
did you see that flight that was done? That was like a wave flight all the way up to the
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah,
Canadian border and back. That has nothing to do with this kind of weather forecast, right?
correct. I'll show you.
Okay.
I'll show you the tools for that too. I can briefly light up SkySight in a second here, and I'll show you. In fact, there's some wave forecast for this weekend. But those guys, the wave forecast is really good. It's a similar color coded thing. I'll show you that in a second. And that one's really reliable. Like those guys, we load this in. We can load this into our flight computers, and if you have a cell phone connection, it'll update as you fly if SkySight happens to do an update. And you can literally like just drive over the wave areas that are in the bright reds, and almost without fail, it'll get keep you in pretty good shape. It's pretty interesting, and it'll show you throughout the day what it thinks the wave's going to do. Um, Thermals, I think, is a harder. These sort of days like this on the shown here is based on thermal activity most of the time. And so anyway, I scroll through the days, boom, 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 just and if anything shows up with some colors that catch my attention, I pause on that day and I dig a little deeper. All right, so if you just look a little closer, like let's say I'm looking for a 300K flight, which is pretty much my longest right now. I want something in the 500 plus regime. And if you look at these metrics in the box on the top here, these numbers are, this is the nominal pilot and plane assumption. It's probably like a 15-meter class glider with a pretty darn good pilot. And I just leave this at the default standard pilot, which is like 100%. Not exactly a beginner in a club class, and I'm not exactly Sebastian Kawa flying a Diana 3. So something in the middle. And and that also lets it be consistent from check to check. So in this potential flight distance plot, again, um, it combines what it thinks the height and the strength of the thermals are, whether there's going to be clouds to mark your path, whether there's any high cloud cover that's going to pass through on the day and shut down some surface heating, and also whether or not like there's so much cloud happening with cumulus that the tops start to spread out and touch each other and create some shading, overcast, and then maybe even some rain showers. So it tries to give you that quick look, a glance that takes into account everything it can think of. All right, so now I got two different points on this plot. So if we just look on the right, or two different topics on this slot with SkySight. If you look on the right side here, you can literally click on a point on the map. You click on this point forecast feature, click on a point, and it'll give you the day's flow. And it's a pretty good snapshot. At one point, I clicked on Wyndham, and this is what came up. And if you go from top to bottom, it'll tell you if you see all blue in the high cloud cover, then there's no like clouds moving in at the high altitudes. Mid cloud is kind of like other types of weather systems. I don't pay too much attention. I just look for any kind of gray boxes that show up. Low and cumulus clouds, that's like the bread and butter stuff. And you can see like here, it's like, sunny and no clouds until about 10:30. Then it's saying cumulus are going to show up by 2:30 there might be some minor overcasting. It kind of flickers back and forth between nice cues and some overcast till 3:30, 4 o'clock. Surface heating kind of just gives you a relative indication. Like you can see the bright yellows 11:30 to 1:30 or 2. It's like, okay, normal summer type stuff. And then it gives you like what are the thermal strengths at this point, and it's like okay, 11 a.m. you're already in the 4 knots ish or so, and it's in the threes or fours until 4:30 or so when things are normally starting to drop off heating wise. And then this plots down here, the pink is kind of like where will condensation and clouds form. And if there's gray above them, it'll show you like a cloud top. So somewhere around, 10:30, 11, it says that there's going to be some cloud forming. And then, the clouds are going to go from 6,000 to, 8,000 in the meat of the day. And then, as is typical for New England, like later in the day, the cloud bases kind of rise up a little bit, and that's where you can get some of your higher altitudes. And then the red is its best guess for the soarable height. Sometimes it's stingy. Sometimes it doesn't think you're going to be able to climb the cloud base. I generally pay attention to the condensation layer. It does acknowledge that maybe around 2 p.m. or so in that region, you right up to cloud base if you want. And I think they like that as soon as the thermal strengths start to drop off near cloud base, they generally cap off the soarable height. So actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to SkySight real quick. Um, so here's our region right now, and then this was today's forecast. this time slider is currently at 2 p.m. up at the top here. And I'm currently looking at height of thermals, and it actually thought today that there was 2,500 foot thermal tops. And if I put the time slider back at 10 o'clock, it was only less than 1,500 feet. All you got to do is keep clicking throughout the day, and it'll kind of tell you what the thermal heights it thinks we're doing. And you can see it kind of grows into slightly higher altitudes during the middle of the day, and it claimed even 3,500 feet in Rhode Island today. And then you keep clicking, and you generally see it shut down. You know, oh, actually here 3 p.m. there's more stuff coming in, and these tops could be because instability of some weather pattern. But here by like I don't know, I guess this is around 4 o'clock. You can see it all kind of disappears, and suddenly no thermals. So you can do the same thing with thermal strength. And what SkySight does is if you see these dots, it means that there's going to be some shear because it's mostly wind and not a whole lot of thermal. And then if it's clear and there's not a lot of dots, okay, you got decent flyable, 3.5 knot thermals that aren't all broken up. So that's kind of how SkySight works. It allows you to walk through the day and see a particular parameter just throughout the day. And then I like to look at cloud base, because if I see no cloud base, it means there's no clouds like here at 10 a.m. today. And then, as you walk through the day, you'll see it kind of fill in. But this is real important. Like I'm always looking at thermal height, cloud base, and stuff. This is sort of how I. Now, what's interesting is if we just scroll down a little bit and we go, oh, here's the other thing that's really thermal layer wind average. So this is something like you'll see later. I have a personal limit for a cross country plan if I see this too high. But this is basically if you're circling, what's kind of the typical wind you're going to see? Here's 7 knots, 9 knots. This is something that I always look at on a day I'm considering, and I like to see less than 15 here. And then interestingly here, I'll show you wave really quick. I'll just pick 10,000 feet, and then we shall look. I'll look out. This is like it's kind of tough to see, but you can see the Cape. This is Connecticut. This is Post Mills, Franconia, New Hampshire, Gorham, all that stuff. So if I just walk through the days here, here's like 1 p.m. today. This is 1 p.m. tomorrow. If I just keep going here, I think Sunday we see something. Okay, so Sunday you suddenly see some reds and oranges and like, whoa, what's this? So you can see these ripply patterns here, which often are, perpendicular. The shape of these wave bars are perpendicular to these wind vectors. And sure enough, if we go zoom in to basically exactly where wave camp was in this area, 1 p.m. on Sunday, we've got 4 knots here, 5 knots here. And if I just walk it through the day a little bit, you'll see it kind of growing. And then even here, we got 6 knots up, and that's at 10,000. I could just for fun click on 20,000 feet. And sure enough, there's still 5 knots at 20,000 feet. So this is pretty reliable. You can also see that it's 60 knots of wind up there. So, that's wave for you. But so that's a quick look at SkySight. And I'll kind of pause there on SkySight.
Well, what's your track record with as it on the thermal side? Is it pretty good? Like, is it something that you rely on and it's pretty bulletproof, or is it more just kind of directional?
Okay. Good segue, because here's my summary. I have actually been known to like plan a day, be ready to go, and then like so it's a little hit or miss. I've gone on 100% blue day, no clouds, and I think Mark was there. This was a couple years ago, and we had beautiful cloud streets that kind of went on forever at like 5,000 feet. So it was 100% wrong about the cumulus clouds. I've also had an interesting thing, and I complained to Dean about this a year later. Beautifully strong forecast day thermal wise, great clouds, and then it was a really weak, low, frustrating day, and then he and I realized it was really obvious. It was one of those smoky days, and SkySight couldn't deal with the smoke. So I quickly went to a calculator online that said that that smoke should have killed like half of the heating of the ground. It was taking away so much solar energy. So it was pretty clear what happened. It just never occurred to me to think about that, and I trusted SkySight. So I tried to fly over Rhode Island. I really struggled, and I came back. Um, Convergence, I could show you that in SkySight. It looks a little like the wave plot, regions of colliding air, and it'll show you. Our sea breeze front is generally kind of weak. It's not as definitive a phenomenon as, say, wave. So I've seen it kind of under and over predict it. But it's generally, when air masses are converging, it's because there's some kind of front or there's some high pressure and good thermal activity. It's pretty easy to predict. So it's generally good at telling you something's going to happen. It might just get the strength wrong or the general size. And then we might talk about sea breeze another time. Sea breeze is weird because the sea breeze will also find ways to sneak inland that are easier, like up the river valley, because it doesn't have to go over some terrain. So like those sort of flows are important to know about, even if the sky site doesn't get them right. And so some complexity to that. Wave again, pretty darn accurate. Still trying to get a feel. I also think like, these guys that fly out west with these big plateaus and big mountain ranges, the models are easier to deal with because it's sort of macro features, whereas in New England we have a lot of microscopic sort of phenomenon happening comparatively.
So back to that sea breeze.
Yep.
I've only experienced that once with Lee. Does that tend to come over and just kind of snuff out the lift over Wyndham? Just move in and crush everything?
Yes. I have yet to see it go much further than Wyndham. I've played around in it for hours and then snuck behind it to see what happens. And yeah, it's like clear blue, kind of dead air. I have found thermals behind it. So it doesn't always shut things down fully, but yeah, it's you don't want to get behind it. And Lee is very paranoid about like you can be at this front and the clouds can be kind of stale. Still looks great, but then you look north and you'll see that there's a new row of clouds forming where the convergence really is, and you're already behind it. And suddenly you're like, oh, that's why I can't find any thermals here, even though it looks good. So he always reminds me, keep an eye, keep looking north in case the thing is snuck in inland from you and you didn't catch it. So that's a thing, and I've got some videos on that, and maybe I can rope Lee into a talk with me on this. So I'm going to move on now to so what do you try to go for on a flight out of range of the local airport? And as a reminder, what this really is like, I'm going to focus on thermal flying. Basically, the idea is you get high enough to leave Wyndham, and then you cruise to a thermal somewhere, and you climb up so that you can cruise to another thermal, and you're doing this kind of all generally within 30 degrees of your desired course. Um, and that's kind of the idea. It's like thermal cruise, and that's how flight computers tend to think you're going to behave too. So my limits are like this. I like to keep, even though I'm flying a 40 to 1 glider on a good day, I want to keep an airport within 20 to 1 per my flight computer's calculation of this, and I rely on the flight computer, but I also, I 20 to 1 is basically 4 miles per 1,000 feet. So, there's some rules of thumb. You can sanity check, but I set up the flight computer to do this for me to reduce workload, and I'll get into that also. Basically, flight computers are really good at calculating what is the L over D you're getting over the ground right now. And if you're going into a honking headwind, it's going to be pretty miserable. If you're in sync, it's going to be miserable. And they're also pretty good at telling you a required L over D to get to every airport you're showing on your map. And so it's a really great situational awareness tool to keep safe, keep you aware of when options are going away. The second one is, so I want to be able to climb to at least 4,500. There are other people. There's this guy Tim, YouTuber out of the Southern Hemisphere. There, he'll fly all day at, 3,500 feet or less, and he's amazing. He does have a turbo, he's got an engine that pops up, but some people are more comfortable. My stress goes up, if I've only got a couple 3,000 feet before pattern altitude, I get very stressed. And it's funny how the difference between 4,500 AGL climb heights and 6,000, or actually 4,500 AGL, I really meant MSL there. Yeah, but anyway, uh, if if it's a 6,000 foot day where you can climb up to 6,000, it's 10 times more fun than a 4,500 foot MSL thermal top day. Those extra 1,500 feet, that's another 6 miles, even under relatively poor performance. And suddenly you're like, this is awesome because you've got options and you got some time and cruise a little longer. So I don't like being stressed, and I've found that I just get stressed. I sweat, and my heart rate's up. I'm like, this isn't fun. Why am I doing this? Um, Thermal layer of less than 18 knots. So I'll show you what happens when you got 10 knots or something on the nose in another slide, and you'll see why, I don't like to fight. Because if you're going to go on a round trip course somewhere, you're going to have some headwind, and it complicates your planning and what you can reach. Um, and it also breaks up thermals. Like I'll tell you a little story later about when I left. I retreated back home on probably the strongest day I've ever seen. I was kind of getting over a cold, but and I was making myself sick. The thermals were super strong, but they were narrow, and I had to crank the plane over. So when they're broken like this, you generally banked up at maybe 50 degrees instead of maybe 40, and it's more work, and you're going to be drifting downwind, so situation's developing quicker than otherwise. Um, Distance from home used to stress me out, but it was because I didn't have a really good handle on my situation and I wasn't very in control of my options all the time. And finally, as I got more comfortable with monitoring my situation, it really didn't matter where I was or how far away from home. It's just an inconvenience level. So it is really exciting to be far away. You just might not get an aero retrieve due to, legality of nighttime um, and stuff like that. But I'll just call my son, make him drive, or maybe pick me up in the Cherokee. Then I come back and I drive my thing north. And we've already had Bill and Joe pick me up at Danielson on a day, I think, when Mark landed out at Woodstock also. And so and I still owe you guys a dinner for that. So and then the last thing is the I'm safe, just monitoring your ability. So 3 hours or more is no joke, and if you're overdoing your energy, that'll wipe you out. And then to plan like a 6 hour flight, if the longest you've done is three, maybe is a rethink, because you just have to kind of build up to that. And I'll talk about that trip where I turn around in the Quabbin later on. So here's the thing, like, so where am I going to fly? So I've chosen to leverage the density of the airports on this route north, um, for a couple reasons. Familiarity is nice. It kind of de-stresses me, and it's extensible. Like if I can, like I never made it past Sterling for a while, and then I made it to Keene one time, and now I'm like, well, shoot, if I know all this stuff in this area, maybe I'll try to make Springfield on a really good day, and so it's like it de-stresses a lot of the flight if you're going over familiar territory. The downside is that, hey, you're not really branching out, and but I'm definitely going to push the distance all the time, and that's enough branching out for me. Um, so I don't necessarily, although I've tried to go, Rhode Island's beautiful, and I'd like to go to the shoreline and stuff too. And I have flown like the westerly Groton stuff, Richmond, and that's really pretty too. And there's plenty of land out options over there too. But for me to really push the distance, I'm going to leverage this. So what's cool is generally speaking, there's an airport. My mouse is misbehaving here. Less than 15 miles between them. So what that means is you get halfway to the next airport. That's only 7 or 8 miles before you can make a go, no go decision. And 7 or 8 miles, even at 20 to 1, is like 2,000 feet of altitude. So you can kind of do some back of the napkin math in your head and go, oh, unless something goes horribly wrong here, I can turn around or I can proceed. And you make this go no go decision, and you just kind of jump from airport to airport or nearby the airports, and and I find great comfort in that. And so it's plenty. There's plenty of options here, plenty of territory, on this north route. The further you go north, you're going to run into like the Greater Boston guys, and then the NISA guys. Landing at Sterling is like, sure, we'll give you a tow, or yeah, hang out with us. We'll store your glider. I mean, it's comfort zone, and the Springfield guys are great. One time I flew this route, and just as I was clipping the Rhode Island border, Rick Rolke from NISA was coming down from like Post Mills and flew over the top of me in his ASH 31. And then I was way up at Keene and he flew over the top of me again, like 3 hours later. I didn't realize it until later, and I emailed him, and I thought that was pretty funny. How like what are the chances? But it's just a lot of activity, and and there's plenty of support up there. Um, the airport elevations are pretty consistent. I think the highest one in here is like 1,000 feet or something. So it's not like you're dealing with terrain and that's complicating things. Although terrain does help with thermal heights. Um, and then you can also, SkySight has got some crazy advanced stuff. You can literally like just draw your course in SkySight and it'll calculate the best time for you to launch, and it'll kind of nudge your course a little left or right based on, predicted thermal strengths, and give you all sorts of suggestions. And, again, it's not 100% reliable. So, so the flight computer, right? So the flight computer is interesting because it's so easy to get a cheap flight computer. Like this is literally a picture I took with my phone of my UDI N, which is running a software called CU Navigator. And come to find out, for like dirt cheap, little to nothing, you can run this exact same software on your phone. It'll look exactly the same, give you exactly the same features. It's just your phone won't be as bright. It might overheat in the sun. It just takes a little more management. But this is awesome, awesome stuff. And here, on the right, like the triangle in the middle is just me sitting at home. And you can see in the bottom right, I'm 6 feet above the ground level. Um, and then the default task point that it's referring to right now would be the takeoff point for the task, which is, it says IJD. So it's saying, Wyndham is 22 nautical miles. Its magnetic bearing to Wyndham is 350. It can't calculate my track or required LRD because I'm not really moving anything. I also show that I happen to have this blue course in the computer, which is 189 nautical miles in there. And that was actually, I think that was the Keen task. If given the gliding that it thinks I'm trying to do, it would says I would be 5,000 feet below the ground if I tried to glide from my sofa, to Wyndham. Um, so this thing is such a workload reduction tool, and I actually saw a study somewhere where they studied what pilots could do in their heads while flying, and your mental capacity is really compromised in terms of doing complex calculations, particularly under stress, like I'm getting low. So these things are just awesome. And it's basically, if nothing else, a GPS moving map where just, you follow the line, you know where you are, you can see the airports around you. You can click on any airport, it'll give you the normal, it'll show you airport elevation, runway orientation and length and all that stuff. Frequencies, you can listen into the CTAF, you can listen to AWOS. I'm always like clicking on one of these and listening to their AWOS, updating my altimeter setting on a longer flight. Um, and then wind speed and direction is interesting because while you're circling, it actually calculates your drift, and it will. I don't see that I'm not showing a wind display on this page, but it will actually give you a wind vector up here on the screen. So and every time you thermal, it kind of updates it, and it'll kind of gives you a real-time idea what you're up against, super helpful. And then the current LOVD, which is again blank over here, that's like how you doing in the real world over the ground. It's everything. And then required LOVD is just for the next target, your next waypoint on your route. So that, that's meaningless in this example because I'm not flying, but so that's but then next to every single airport thing here would be if I could reach an airport, it'll show me an L over D. If I don't show, if it's not showing up on the map, it means that it's out of range. So you'll see these green numbers show up around each airport. Um, and then, so there's also a bunch of waypoints. I don't know that any of these are really shown on the map at the moment, but this gets into like waypoint databases. Obviously, the FAA database for airports is one thing, but what happens is clubs generally publish a database that is uploadable into these flight computers. I use mine from Greater Boston. They're pretty complete and they walk a bunch of fields and to keep it fairly up to date. And that's out on the web and you can upload it into your flight computer and it'll also give you other fields and Devil's Hop Yard or something. And you can click on it. It'll tell you, what it thinks the landable distance is and that sort of thing. Again, shouldn't come into play unless things kind of went awry and you're looking at a field versus a landable, an airport, but it's super helpful. Another thing I like to display is current altitude AGL because that takes the terrain thing away. At a glance, you know what you got over above the ground. You don't have to do any math. Like, well, I'm at 2000 MSL. Like, what's the terrain height where I am? You know what I mean? It's just so you set up these boxes, and they're all infinitely configurable. They've got 1,000 of them you can select and put on your screen. Everybody does theirs a little bit differently. Um, let's see what else. So. So there's one very interesting thing here, and so I mentioned it a little bit before the meeting here, but um, what airports you can reach depends on how fast you're going to fly your glider in that direction. Um, and I'm not talking about wind, I'm talking about the performance of your glider. So this gets into a whole bunch of things that you can choose to optimize, or you can just use some basic guidelines. But at the end of the day, the only takeaway after this discussion will be like when my computer tells me I can make Danielson, with 1,000 feet of extra altitude, I want to make sure that it's not thinking I'm just flying at best over D. I want it to think that I'm doing my normal cruise flight, and then I even want some margin. So there's this thing called McCready theory, and that basically that gets into a strategy for flying based on how strong the thermals are on a given day. And we'll discuss this a little bit. It's not terribly important. Um, and and it's truly, oddly, not nearly as important as making sure you always climb in a strong thermal. You can actually fly pretty poor speeds, too fast or too slow, and it won't screw you up as much as you might think. But I'll show you later that if you're very tentative and you take very, very weak thermals, it crushes your average speed around a course way more than how fast you chose to cruise between thermals. Um, so the point of this particular slide is when I tell my flight computer that I'm going to fly a speed appropriate for like 3 or 4 knot thermals, and the computer interprets that as, oh, you're going to go faster than your best L over D speed then, because that's a pretty strong day. You're probably going to be scooting around at 75 knots because you think you're going to, you got a day that's going to spit out consistently 3 or 4 knot average thermals. And so that sets up my flight computer to be a little pessimistic about my glide performance when it tells me what I can reach and what I can't reach. So this is an interesting strategy. Um, I can provide you a link to a guy, Clemens Shepek, I think, out of Colorado. Amazing analytical pilot. Um, he'll tell you all about this stuff and strategies for do this. Um, so basically, the takeaway is when you tell your flight computer a McCready value, you're telling it like, I'm not going to fly, I'm not going to stop for any thermals unless they are this many knots strong or higher. So again, I set it to 3 or 4. So I'm telling it on average 3 or 4 knots up. And that includes my circling to center it and all the sync I accidentally fly in when I first jump into it. So like if my variometer is showing 400 or 500 feet per minute up, once I'm centered and stuff, and then it's probably in reality a McCready 3 or 4 because it took you a little time to get established in the thermal. So anyway, so this is a massive, like we could do hours on this theory alone, but you're forced to kind of tell your computer what your strategy is for the day. So the point is I tell it something a little bit over aggressive for my flying speeds, and that has it tell me a little bit more conservatively what I can reach. So I should be able to reach at least as far as it thinks I can. So part two of this whole,
Bill, quick question.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Do you also hedge your L over D that your glider is capable of flying? Like if
yeah.
it's a 40-to-1 glider, do you put it in at 20-to-1 or do you put it in what it can actually do?
So so flight computers are also so smart that they have massive databases of all the gliders out there. I literally just pick my glider and I tell it I don't have my ballast in or anything. And you can even give it like what percentage of bugs do you have on your wings, and it'll degrade the performance. So I let it use the factory flight polar or performance curve, which is definitely going to be a little bit more ideal than like 50-year-old gliders condition and everything else. But I will let it use my factory performance, but I'll make sure that I tell it I'm going to like fly at speeds that are crappier performance than I really intend. So I don't continue to slice and dice it by hampering the glider performance, but and actually, what's cool about that is I think in an ideal day, my glider's not that far off of its factory performance, and I like looking at my actual L over D and going, why is that so bad compared to my 40-to-1? And it's almost always due to sink or headwind, and I'll show you how massively that affects actual performance shortly. So to answer your question, I don't really handicap it too much other than this McCready setting I was telling you about. Um, so let me pause on variometers for a second. Audio variometer to me is super important because you can't be looking at the needle all the time. You got to be looking out at the cockpit, and while you're circling, you should just be listening and not continually moving your head in and out, head in and out, head in and out. And you can get an audio variometer fairly cheap. I think nowadays, like you almost can't get a variometer that isn't like you can either get purely analog ones that are not audio, or you can get like digital ones like the one on the right, and that puts you in the $700 category or something. And they almost always are so smart now that they'll have a database of your polar, and you give it a McCready value. You tell it how aggressive you are going to be for the day, and it'll tell you whether to speed up or slow down based on whether you're in sync or lift. So now, I will say the speed to fly function thing doesn't, you don't really need it. The cardinal rule is you're cruising between thermals and suddenly your variometer, most gliders maybe 200 feet per minute down if you're going, 65, 70 knots, glider of my kind. If suddenly you see it's 350 to 400, well, okay, I'm in some sync. Let's shove the nose over and not spend as much time because even though you're going to lose more altitude by going faster, it's much, much more important you get out of the sync. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But So even if you just adhere to I'm in sync, let me speed up more than my nominal cruise speed, and then oh I'm in some lift. I'll very often slow down to minimum sync, particularly if it's convergence or there's a cloud straight. I'll just slow down a minimum sync until I climb right up to cloud base. I'm not even turning. And then if it's a straight, then I'll just accelerate so that I don't fly into the cloud. And even if you're flying only 40 knots, 45 knots, you're going straight ahead. You're not circling, so you're making progress on course, and your sync rate is going to be minimal, and your climb rate is going to be higher as a result. So the only reason I mentioned the speed to fly function is this: I happen to have it in my Vario, and if I tell this now, I tell the Vario I'm going to fly a little more conservatively. So I have it tell me to fly slower than my flight computer otherwise would. So that this is where I have that margin I was talking about. The flight computer is like expecting me to fly fast. I'm telling the Vario, I told the computer I'm going to fly 3 or 4 knot thermals. I'm telling you, I'm happy to take 2.5 knot ones. So consequently, it's going to say you don't need to crank as fast. You need a little more performance. So this is sort of the other half of that strategy. And this is not it's not super critical. A way to do 95% of this as effectively is you just use these block speeds. Okay, on a really weak day, I'm going to fly pretty close to the best L over D most of the time in between thermals. On a 3 or 4 knot thermal day in New England, 65 to 70 knot cruise is pretty close to optimal. And then if I'm cruising along and I hit some sync, I accelerate 75 to 85. And if you do this, you're going to be 95% as good as following the push-pull bar, because these varios, they know your speed and everything. They're connected to your pitot-static and total energy and stuff. So they know how fast you're going, and they'll just tell you to shove the stick forward. So um, okay, so there's some stuff that just some housekeeping you have to do to be ready to go, and that is, you've picked the route, and I know this route pretty well, but I don't remember the airport frequencies and elevations and how many runways they have, and then you got to check NOTAMs. One time I flew to Sterling, and I'm like, oh, I got Southbridge made. Turns out Southbridge was closed, but I didn't check the NOTAMs. So if I needed to land out, it would have either been illegal or it would have had the runway. They were repaving, might have had big, trucks on the runway for all I know. Who knows? Um, and you can also, it's a really great idea. Just scan Google Earth. There are elements of that north route where there's nothing really there other than those airports. So you should kind of like scan Google Earth and just get a feel for that when you should be a little more conservative in what areas of the route. Um, for me, 2, 3, 4 hours. You got to keep the energy kind of at a burble. You can't just get totally wiped out and then take a massive meal. You got to kind of keep consistent energy mentally. Sugar's not so great, although I consciously take a sports drink so that if I'm coming to a landing or I just need to like wake up, I'll just I'll take a vitamin water that has sugar and caffeine, and I'll chug a third of it, but knowing that I should still follow with protein bar, a little later. Tons of water. Can't really overdo the water in terms of having leftover. It's not a big deal. Um, I struggled with a personal relief plan, basically having to pee. It's early on. It shut down my flights. I was like, oh, I didn't count on this. You just can't hold it and hope for the best. So it was like, oh, I got to go land. And there's like a lot of the GBS, I don't know if they'd be thrilled with me telling you, but a lot of the Greater Boston guys, they have catheter condoms and they cut a hole in their jean and they literally have a tubing coming out that they plug into a tube that exits their glider once they climb in the glider, and it's a non-issue with them. Some of them have them go to like pee bags strapped to their legs, these that's out of the medical industry. You can buy those. I use these low rent CVS things. They seal, and it's pretty astonishing. Like, not to be gross, but they take a tremendous amount of volume of liquid and immediately turn it into gel. It's like it's hard to create a mess or spill. It's like, wow, okay, that was kind of easy, but and there's a lot of every approach has its shortcomings, and there's tons of options. What's interesting, this UV thing, I've been kind of stupid because I never get a tan because the tanning UV gets blocked by the polycarbonate and the canopy, but the other dangerous UV absolutely does not. You'll see like serious cross-country pilots, they're wearing gloves, hoods, long sleeves, and it's because, if you think about it, oh, I fly every weekend, I sit under the canopy for 4 hours, no, just sitting there baking in the sun. It doesn't feel like you're baking. It's not the same sensation, and you don't tan, but I think you're really abusing your DNA, in your skin. So I started getting a little more vigilant with that. Well fed, well hydrated, obviously. And then in my case, I carry glasses in case I rub my eye and my contact falls out. Like, oh crap. I also keep a pair of spare contacts in my glasses case if in case I want to try to put another contact back in. In the case of, most people who do this, you got your own glider, right? Even if it's a club glider, right? There's generally a ship battery that's got to get charged. If you have a handheld, make sure it's charged. If you have a flight computer, your phone, is it going to last the whole thing? I use USB battery for a phone. I also have a camera that suction cups to the canopy. That's got a battery because it runs out after like 45 minutes on its own battery. Tire pressures, just think about it, stuff like that in advance. Don't get caught. I got caught at least once looking for, borrow a pump at Wyndham. Just kind of sets things back, your schedule. So the night before, yeah, I try to have my trailer and everything just ready to go so I can jump in the morning and go. If there's other stuff that the glider's going to need before liftoff, just expect, plan for the time to do that. It takes a few minutes to clean a canopy without scratching it and everything else. There's pins that usually need cleaning and greasing and to rig it together so it goes together. And then you can check the weather again the night before, check the weather the morning of. I'm slow and painful at everything I do, so I get an early start. Um, and then the other thing is this has become more, I've been better about this now. It's just making sure I leave the trailer ready to drive away because otherwise the back's open. It's on these little trailer jacks. All my crap's spread out on the ground. Nobody else knows where this stuff goes. It's like a Rube Goldberg puzzle to try to get it all back together. So I just leave it so that the keys are right there. And at least we proved it once. Joe and Bill picked me up. Didn't have any issue. So, but there's no way they could have done that if I'd left all my stuff spread out. Um, so so now it's like, how do I fly this thing, right? Here's sort of like what goes through my head and how I do this. So right after launch, I'm climbing near the airport. Like, how are things working? This cloud base generally starts at 3,500, on a summer day for us, and it goes up to 45, maybe 5,500 throughout the day, a typical day. So if you're down at 3,500, maybe you're not ready to blast away from the airport yet. Um, I want like I said, I think before I said 4,500, 4,000. I'm not going anywhere unless I see a lot of cloud bases looking good, and I got 4,000 feet MSL. Because if I hit some sync and I'm right in the middle of these two airports, things could get kind of interesting. And then wind. If you're going into the wind, realize you can turn tail and run. Probably past the midpoint and still make it. And again, the flight computer is pretty good at showing your progress into a wind. Um, so once you've decided, okay, I'm going to go for it, it becomes a situational awareness exercise, just basically from start to finish, and and how hard that is depends on the day and how much extra room you got between you or your glider and the ground. So it can either be constantly high workload or it can be like pretty chill because like, oh, look at this guy, I got cloud streets. I'm up at 7,000 feet. Woohoo! It's like those days are just such a blast. But so you're leaving. So now it's like, are clouds working? They all look good. Sometimes they don't, this cloud looks great, but why is there no, it's all sync under this cloud. So get a feel for how this day is working. I don't know the logic behind, why some look great and don't work. There's this thing called cycling. Thermals don't stay there forever. Some days they cycle real fast. I've been like on the way to Sterling headed for a cloud. I'm like, oh, damn it, that cloud is disappearing. It's going to be gone by the time I get there. And then I get under this messy, dark gray, flat mess. It's no longer a cloud. I'm going up at 5 knots, going, okay, I didn't see that coming. But so it's kind of hit or miss. And I've decided I can't predict. I just got to make sure I stay aware and I can reach airports and don't count on something that looks good. Blue days, whoops, sorry, let me go back. Blue day means you don't have any cumulus, you don't have any streets, you don't have any nice puffy clouds to say, hey, there's a thermal over here probably. Um, they used to drive me crazy, but it was because I was scared, like, oh, if I don't find lift, I'm gonna have to land. As long as you're just got your situation sorted out, like, oh, I can reach Toutant I only need a 14-to-1 glide ratio to Toutant. So sure, let me keep going. And if I run into a thermal, it's awesome, and a blue day. So none of this is scary. It means you might have to land because you didn't find lift, but you should be able to reach somewhere safe to land if you're managing things properly. Um, and then blue days can be awesome because like you run into a thermal on a blue day and there's a little bit of wind, 10 or 15 knots. The first thing you should do leaving that thermal is point upwind, directly upwind, and see if there's a line of lift. There might be a beautiful lift street that just doesn't have any clouds marking it. And if it's within 30 degrees of your course, you just cruise it. Sometimes they're 90 degree to your course, and it makes things harder to make progress. But they can be really, really great. The downside is that you might run into the sink in between lift lines on a blue day. You can't see, there's no visual cue. You don't even know where things are, but you know that for the last minute you've been in some serious sink. It's like I'm getting shot down here. Time to make a change. So that has happened to me, and I've seen in WeGlide traces of guys from GBSE. I'm like, oh look, he's getting low there, and I'll literally see them make a 90-degree turn, and that is the strategy. Like, I think I'm in some kind of a sink line or something. I'm going to make an aggressive change here and try to arrest this situation. So this is a real messy, like, oh Jesus, plots, colors, arrows. But there's a very interesting thing here. So every POH comes with a pilot's or an airplane's performance curve. And in this case, this is an example of actually, I think it's the glider that Lee flies, Discus CS. This is the sink rate versus speed. So the flattest portion of this curve is probably his best LRD, 40 to 1, 42 to 1. And then as you fly as fast as in this example, 83 knots, the LRD falls off to 29 to 1. So so why am I showing this? Because there's actually, if you actually have access to one of these plots, there's a very interesting thing you can do with a line. And all you have to do, we talked about like McCready theory, like, okay, it's a strong day. I'm gonna hold out for 4 knot thermals. I've been in one already. The clouds look amazing. This is a 4 knot day, damn it. So if you take your polar and on the positive y-axis, you locate that 4 knots, which is 400 feet per minute, and you put one end of a line there, and you just let the rest of that line fall and hit the polar blue performance plot. Where it hits will be the fastest, the best speed for you to fly between thermals to get around that course fastest. And where that line crosses the horizontal axis is your average speed around the course for the whole day. So it's really interesting. Paul McCready figured all this crap out. And there's other complex math, but this weird little trick with polar plots. So in the case of Lee's glider, if he's like, this is a 4 knot day, and if he's right and he follows this strategy, in doing this, immediately shows that he should fly 83 knots between thermals, and he's going to average 48 to 50 knots around the course for a 300K day or something. And it's a really easy trick. And you can actually, if you cared, you could make a little table and and sticky it to your panel. And this would be the proper choice based on the thermal strength for a day. Now, what's interesting is I mentioned that this is the average thermal, so you better be seeing 450 to 500 feet per minute, when you're settled in your thermal if you use a McCready 4, because you wasted some time getting into it and everything else. But it's interesting how this math works out. Um, Now, I could show you this, but if you just take my word for it, you can screw up this speed selection. If you notice, the red line and the blue line are pretty close to each other for a pretty wide span of speed, say 70 to 85 or 90. If you were to fly those speeds, this line wouldn't move that much. It would bump your average speed maybe down to 44 or up to, you'd never get higher. This is the max, but you'd be pretty close to that optimal speed. But if you drop this red line down to 2 or 1 knots because you're chickening out and you're like, I got to take weak thermals, I'm nervous, that moves your average speed way down. So the takeaway with all this math is on a good day, hold out for the good thermals. Don't just freak out and try to stay high all the time and take a 1 knot thermal. And in the extreme case where you're taking every 1 knot thermal, and you do this same exercise, you pin the line to 1 knot and you see where it hits your polar curve. Okay, now it's saying I'm going to fly 60. That's pretty close to best L over D. And then you look where it crosses the x-axis. My average speed is going to be 25 knots around this course, literally twice as long to get around the course. And if you had a 300K day, you ain't going to make it all the way around. You're going to run out of daylight. So that's the motivation for thinking about this stuff. But the takeaway is if you want to get around a long course, try to be patient and wait for good thermals without getting so low that you lose options. But this is where all that strategy comes from. It's actually the math of your polar and McCready theory. So it's like this is advanced stuff for soaring pilots, and it's not even that critical you fly at the right speed, but it's really critical you don't take really weak thermals all the time because it crushes your average progress.
Bill, this might be a lead into another slide, but the from a wind perspective, do you follow McCready exactly to what is that, or do you also add or just subtract like you would for Bessel over D?
Yeah, so uh, that's a really good question. Um, I'll generally I honestly don't know. I kind of wing it. Like on a really good day base, they talk about shifting gears also. Like you try to look ahead. Like there's another thing I think I say here in a slide coming up, but like when you're thermaling, you should be looking out on course and like picking your next thermal. How good does it look? How far a glide is it? You know, if it's a long glide and the clouds don't look so great, maybe fly a little slower so you arrive at the next one a little higher. So it's kind of like that's the sort of stuff I do. I won't necessarily hamper it, but with wind, however, um, you can there's that's a great question. I don't have a great strategy for wind other than I make sure that I add a few knots. Like usually I'll add half of the wind speed
Yeah.
when beating up wind. And then if I'm going downwind, I won't go excessively fast. If anything, I'll kind of pull back 5 to 10 knots or something. So that again, it's funny because your question's really great because I never really thought about it. I skipped over it, and I think it's because I probably don't think about it enough. But I just kind of intuitively speed up half wind speed above the suggested speed when
Yeah,
going.
that makes sense. That's what I would think so too, because the whole polar would shift left to right on here. So I think you would still do the same.
Exactly. Now here's the reality. This is huge, and this is why people get shot down. Awesome planning. The day looks good. Even that fulfills the forecast. You're flying the right speeds. You're aiming for this thing, and then you just run into a crap load of sink. Um, and then the headwind's a little more strong than forecast. So here's how impactful modest sink and modest wind can be to your life. Like okay, I wasn't paying attention. I'm between streets in the blue, and I've got a consistent 100 to 150 feet more sink rate than my glider should have. Suddenly, that nice 40 to 1 that you might have if you're flying perfectly, straight and coordinated. Now the best you're going to do is 22 to 1 in that sink. And then if you're not really not paying attention and you're in 2 knots of sink for that time period of time, you're now 17 to 1 glider. So now you had all these nice airports in range saying, oh, you're like 18 to 20 to 1 required to get to these airports. But now you're getting shot down. So all that planning goes out the window, and it's absolutely critical you keep your head up and look for these situations and make changes and get out of sync, divert. And when you have a choice, turn in the direction of your safety airport. Um, and then 10 knots of headwind. Suddenly you lose, 40 to 1, typically 33 to 1 for like 10 knots of headwind. So imagine you're beating your way upwind, 5 to 10 knots of headwind, and you run into, 150 feet per minute of sink. It's like things change really quickly. Um, and then that current L over D display, um, for example, it's like Lee and I were kind of near each other for like a full day of flying. We went up north, we came back, we circled from Yukon all the way back down to Goodspeed, and it was beautiful, calm evening air. And my stupid computer's telling me I was never better than 20 to 1. And I'm like, I left Goodspeed at 6,000 feet, and there was just the residue of a little cloud street left. I had a little bit of lift. I'm like, oh, I should have wind made no problem. And then I was starting to sweat because I'm like, I needed 20 to 1 to get to Wyndham, and I wasn't getting more than 20 to 1. I'm like, what is going on here? So I was just breathing on the controls, and I was flying a few knots over best L over D, and there was the air was super still, but I was like into 8 knots of headwind, and suddenly I was like, whoops, I didn't have any margin. And now I've been looking at fields. And then I got very lucky because I literally ran into like a 50 feet per minute thermal residue or something. I did like 2 turns and I got like an additional, I don't know, maybe an additional 100, 150 feet. And suddenly my L over D was up to like, 22 to 1. And I was close enough to Wyndham now that it only said I needed like a 16 to 1. I was like, I got this unless I hit some sink, and it was fine. But a great day turned into a pretty strong pucker, and I was looking very seriously at fields, um, and but I squeaked out. But if I had run into 150 feet of sink, 150 feet per minute of sink, I might end up in a field. There were a couple critical moments there. Um, so enough of that. So here's another example on I don't remember if this was a day where I went to Sterling and kind of came back because it was just a little too stressful, too much work. As I said earlier today, our club base generally starts at 3,500, and it's like then it builds to 45. Maybe by the end of the day, you got 5,000 or 5,500. There was a light northwest wind. I was still sort of east of Southbridge, which is north of Wyndham across the Mass border. Um, and I was headed in the direction of Sterling. I had a great cruise down, from my previous thermal, everything's everything green, looking good. But now I'm down at 3,200, and I had been aiming for a cloud. That cloud didn't work. It just timed it wrong. I tried it anyway. There was briefly 100 feet per minute up, and then I missed. I fell out of that little pocket of narrow crap lift, and I was like briefly in some strong sink. I recentered. Now I'm kind of like hovering. I'm in a zero climb. Clearly, there's no thermal. I'm like, oh crap, what are my options here? Southbridge had been in kind of semi-comfortable range, but now I've been drifting a bit downwind, getting farther from Southbridge. There's nothing further to the east that's really landable in this particular spot. There was a cloud to the east, and I was like, well, but what if I go there and that one doesn't work? I'm kind of really hosed. So that wasn't really going to happen. And then like, okay, I almost have Worcester in range. It's still kind of upwind. I'm lower than their class D. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a workload element. I'm like, oh, I really should get their ATIS, get them on the, check, get their tower on into my. So it's like I don't know if you've ever tried to mess with frequencies in your glider and stuff. It's a distraction. You're probably going to screw up a thermal turn, and you're probably going to lose 50 feet otherwise than you would have had. And there were no clouds in the direction of Southbridge. Arguably, expect some sink. So suddenly, I went from a fairly in the green moment to now I'm closer to 6 miles downwind. I'm at 3,000 MSL. Field elevation is like 700 feet. Um, I know from just basic math into that wind is probably going to put me in the 20-to-1 performance category. And if I bump into some sink for even a minute, modest sink, my effective performance is probably going to be like 16-to-1. So you do this math in your head quickly. I've only got 1,500 feet to burn to try to get there. 20-to-1 basically gets me there at pattern height. 16-to-1 means I'm going straight in, with and changing my shorts afterwards. So it's like this is the sort of thing you have to try to stay ahead of. Um, so so how do I do that? I'm just looking ahead at the weather. I'm making sure I keep glancing at the wind, see if anything's changing. Um, I just keep aware of the elevations I'm flying into. In general, there's nothing really massive, in the region I've already spoken about. While I'm thermaling, I should be looking ahead. Like how far am I going to the next one? Are those clouds building? Are they going away? Um, and then if you do many people have done this math, like if you see great clouds up to 30 degrees off your course, um, turns out you don't really take much of an overall time penalty or difficulty in adding distance if you just allow yourself as up to 30 degrees. And actually, the earlier you make that choice, the better it turns out. But you can read more about that sort of stuff in the web. And staying in good air is everything. Now, of course, if those 30 degrees are to the right and you're getting blown from left to right with a really strong wind, you have to kind of like intuitively integrate that too and go like, well, really, am I going to really do that? But if you got airports downwind over there, even if they're farther off course, okay, maybe it's the right call. It gives you safe options. So what are the curves? What happens is like in the glider, it's so hard sometimes. It's like things feel great, but there's very often a situation trying to just take over and eat you, as I put it. Um, so you just got to kind of see these slow trends that are just trying not to get your attention and recognize it and go, I see what's going on. All right, but I can, if I deviate a little to the right, I can get closer to this airport and maybe I'll find some good lift. And if you don't, you're closer to a good airport. If you do, you're like, haha, I beat you. I'm back on track. I'm safe. I can get back on course. So I try to stay ahead of it. I don't want to be surprised by the airport information at the last minute. I'm getting a little low here. So maybe it's Gardner or something. I should just glance at it and remind myself so I'm not behind and overloaded at a time when I need to make a fast strategical change. And these flight computers, it's like the software is dirt cheap. You can run it on your phone. Um, Not taking advantage of one, you'd be doing all this stupid math in your head all the time. Oh, I'm at this altitude. Elevation is over there. Okay, then that gives me so much to burn. Is there any wind? What kind of over D do I think I would get? And so it's just so silly easy to use one of these nowadays. Everybody has a phone. A few things that I recalled while putting this together. Um, I had that great Sterling flight. Hey, I got the Red Baron Trophy. All right, wasn't that awesome? And the next weekend, I was like, oh, I'm a cross country pilot now, and it was a pretty good day. It looked really good, and I jetted away from Wyndham at like 3,500 feet. Immediately hit massive sink, and then I tried to work my way back to the airport. I was in big sink, and I'm zigzagging. I'm like, holy crap! And I'm looking at the reservoir. I'm looking at the forest, going, "You're a complete idiot." I had big cold flush of sweat. It was a wake up call and poor management and unnecessary. Like I was not ahead of the situation, and big, dumb judgment, lesson learned. And then, other silly things. It's kind of like protecting yourself from Murphy's Law. Like the day I didn't bring, I have a little El Cheapo handheld, but I have a panel, VHF radio. My button is on the top of my stick. I pressed it while talking to Worcester. I was not in their Class D at the time. The button just pressed right through the top of my stick and disappeared into my stick. I'm like, oh, damn it. So they're trying to call me back, six uniform Alpha, you still there? And I'm like, I had a transponder. I could have set it to 7600. I just didn't think of it. And I was like, I shrugged it off. But I was outside of the airspace. It was a little embarrassing, but not a legality or a real risk. So lesson learned there is just have a plan B for comms and stuff. That best day of the season was killed me because I was up. I had made it to the Quadman. It was like a 7,500 foot day. Everything's super strong thermals. I'm like, this is the day to push into Vermont. But there were narrow thermals, they were still strong. I was making myself nauseous. I just got over a cold and I'm like, you know what? I just have to admit myself, I can't do this. I don't have the stamina today. And then that night I looked at all the 500-kilometer flights that all these Greater Boston guys logged that day. But you just got to admit when you just don't have it in you. And then I already talked about the release system. Pete has seen me more than once land and literally sprint, to the side of the field, even if I make it that far, going, yep, didn't make it. Um, and then that last point was, I have a video out there on YouTube where a 300K flight, just this high cloud crap moved in as I was departing Sterling, heading to the northwest. But I was really, really carefully looking at Fitchburg and Gardner and my progress and my L over D, and could I turn back to Sterling if things didn't, the go no go point I was talking about. And once you see that you've got options, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna keep going on my course, see what happens. And I was pleasantly surprised. There was occasional wisps with decent lift, up to almost six, I think just under 6,000 feet. I'm like, oh, keep going. So if you manage your situation, you can kind of take a chance on conditions, and you may land out, but you should be able to safely land out somewhere. So that took the fear mostly out of my flying. I may get shot down at some point, and end up in a field, just from statistical chance of hitting a whole bunch of sync I couldn't manage. Um, but at least I'm trying to I'm minimizing that and being conservative with the land out option choices. So I think that literally is the end of my presentation. I see it's 9:18. So now I guess I threw a ton of stuff at you guys. I'm hoping that some of it is of interest or useful. And now I would say it's open forum for any of the previous slides or any other aspect of flying cross country from my perspective that anybody wants to talk about.
Bill, it's Joe. Is there a sort of a geographic radius where to the north or whatever where land out options become better or soaring conditions improve? Do things get better as you move north?
It's funny because let me see if I can bring up ForeFlight really fast. Actually, to be honest with you, the Greater Boston guys, they let me do this. Oh, I thought that was weird. The Greater Boston guys said that one of them said to me when we were at Wave Camp, he was like, "You guys are so lucky because you've got so many land out options down there." So it's like, oh Jesus. But to be honest with you, so I'm going to open up and I'll show you. Here's kind of like, actually, here's like IJD. All right, so here's where my mouse is. Right here is Wyndham. Actually, what is it? TFR over Yukon. Um, the route I was showing you guys before, kind of like here's Sterling. Here's Worcester, Southbridge, Teuton. These are all these nice legs. Now, I'm gonna move up a little bit, and this pattern holds up pretty well until about the Keene area. Actually, what is this? Is Jaffrey. So like I've gotten as far as Keene here, and the reality is things start to get trickier. You can either move to the northeast. You obviously got to avoid this class Charlie or something or Manchester. Might even be a Bravo. Oh, Charlie, there it is. And it gets a little sparser. Like even if I zoom in, it formal airports become a
Mhm.
little. But now one thing I learned in cross country course, like if you look at this is Springfield up here in the top left, and that's where we flew the cross country camp. So once if you're willing, so one thing I learned from cross country camp, here's the Connecticut River. The interesting thing about the Connecticut River in the summer is there is an endless number of beautifully cleared agricultural fields all along this river, and we walked on some. I saw a lot from the air. So if you could take it on faith that once you pass Keene, you can fly like within glide distance of the river, then you get into some higher terrain, and you get into Springfield area. You've got Claremont and this other place, and I've flown in this area before. It's cool, but it's funny. It's definitely like it's not as great as our region. You can just see the density of stuff between Wyndham and this whole cluster into, from say, what is this here? This is Turner's Falls, all the way down. So this gives you a ton of options here, but you know, once you pass Keene, things get a little trickier. We do have options also to the south and east, somewhat. But yeah, so I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
How about the soaring conditions, Bill? Because we always talk about how we can always see the cumulus in the distance, but they never come to Wyndham. Like
Yeah.
once you're out of Wyndham area, is that a reality? Do you tend to see better thermals?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have noticed like generally once you're in the Massachusetts, things just get a little bit better typically. Sometimes there's a big blue hole just north of Wyndham, and it makes me want to just tear my hair out. It's like, really? It's tricky. Um, but yeah, it's generally solid. And if you look at the forecast, it tends to imply that pretty often. I will say also the Quabbin shuts down a lot of lift in this area. Like you don't want to be downwind of the Quabbin, so it's kind of
Hmm.
like that's a whole phenomena unto itself. Um, and then what I also don't like is like these. I think these are like Westover. It's like I never bothered to learn. Anybody know Westover? Is that joint military
Right.
and
Yeah, you can land there.
you can? Okay.
Yeah.
And of course Bradley, is the thing, but so that's good to know. Like you could kind of try coming back. Like sometime it'd be cool to try to come back from Turners Falls South, Northampton, and just utilize this and maybe Ellington and stuff. But I like the density of that northern route. That's probably what I'm going to continue to leverage. Like if I try for 500K, I'll probably try like to go up to Keene, maybe Springfield, and then jet back. But try to leverage all that earlier stuff, for low stress, higher density airports.
And Bill, are you declaring tasks when you do this? Like, do you create turn points or are you just kind of going out and seeing how far you can get?
I've started declaring it because it's easy and there's no penalty for doing that. And if you do fly a task and you complete it and you declared it in advance, you get like these nice high. It's kind of satisfying in We Glide. It kind of throws
Sure.
extra
Yeah.
points at you and stuff. And it takes mere seconds to just literally just touch a point in the computer and go add a leg, add a leg, add a leg, and it's a good skill to have if you ever want to try a contest. I don't know if I'll ever try a contest. Mark's done a few. I've sort of flown an emulation of a contest at cross country camp where they staged us and launched us as if we were a contest, and we actually were comparing speed around tasks. So I could probably fake it, but um, those are, that's, I'm not necessarily as scared of it as I used to be, but I think it takes a little bit of guts to do those contests, I think.
How about flight following? Do you use that at all?
No, I make sure I have my mode C going. Um, no, I've never actually tried flight following the glider. I have like whenever I'm like, thinking I'm going to be flying by Worcester on the way to Sterling, I'll usually call Worcester and go, hey, I'm not really going to need to transit you unless something goes wrong, but I might be flying over the top of you. And sometimes they pull a fast one. They'll tell me to not cross a line, east west of their airport within their lateral boundaries. They've actually asked me to do that as I've said, hey, listen, I'm, southwest of you at 5,500. I don't see a need, I don't see a need to transition, but just giving you the heads up out of courtesy. And then they'll go like, glider 6 uniform alpha, stay south of a line east west, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't think they legally can tell me to do that. When I'm outside of their class delta, but I'm like I shrug it off and I cooperate because there's a whole lot of ops that they have to deal with between Sterling. I don't want to cause any, but I have
Yeah.
noted like, hey, if I really wanted to push it, I'm just going to go anyway. So, but yeah, so there's that. But yeah, never tried flight following. I wouldn't really know what to expect with my inability to hold an altitude or even maybe a course.
Yeah, I think more traffic callouts, but that's it.
Right? Yeah, no deal.
Hey Bill, when you do your flight planning, what do you and your declare a flight? What are you using? Are you using anything specific, or using your like glide plan is one they talked about at the SAA seminar on cross country.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, glide plane, is that the one that has all those concentric rings that show you like what altitude?
Right. You can basically do, yeah, basically your safety rings around an airport. It just really automates it and you can move it around based on expected winds, etc.
Yeah. No, it's too bad. I wish I actually there used to be a simulator, like actually the UDI version that Mark has, they actually have an online simulator for um or a simulator you can install on your PC. I could actually show you how I just select the course in the UDI, and then when you jump in the plane, you just tap the leg, and it'll tell you, it'll wait for you to cross your start point or line, and then it'll immediately put up your next leg destination waypoint on the screen and give you the navigation to it and stuff. But sometimes, well, I'll do my planning in ForeFlight because I have that for just regular powered flight. And that's unfortunately another subscription thing where you can just go, flight plan. I'll just, put it in here, and then it'll give me the mileage, and bearings and stuff. And um, but yeah, otherwise I just literally throw it in the flight computer on the UDI. Um, so yeah, so that's
That was
it.
great. Super interesting.
Yeah, really good. Nice job, Bill.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So seriously, like, if anything occurs to you guys, feedback wise, like, oh, it would have been cool if you had talked about this stuff, or like, what did you mean by this? Just, just, just email me or something, um, so I know, if I do one of these again, how to approach it a little bit better. Because, um, as you can see, there's a ton of information. Did I try to touch on too many things, or, and so feedback appreciated, I think, is the
Yeah,
takeaway.
I think the pace was good. I thought the amount was good. Give a chance to people to ask questions, things that may not have been clear, but that's a lot, but it wasn't overwhelming, I didn't think.
Cool. Let's see if I'm gonna stop recording, I think.